Well, welcome back, Michael Gerloff, to XO News TV. So, Michael, can you just begin by telling us any significant experiences you had in Army boot camp and 2nd Ranger Battalion?
You know, there really were no significant experiences in boot camp for me. I went into boot camp on December 31st, 1987, completed the course, and then I was sent on to Army Airborne School. They're at the same military installation, Fort Benning, Georgia. Of course, that's a 3-week course. I completed that course. There's a particular thing that you do in that course, and it'll tie to a deja vu and some dreams and memories that I've had since then that I think are significant to point out. In Airborne School, one of the training apparatus that they make every effort to get you to use or create the opportunity is the big towers. They have these big giant jump towers, and what you do is they have a parachute attached to that. They hoist you up in the air and release you, and you get practice, you know, drifting to the ground and doing your parachute landing falls and things like that. When I went through Airborne School in the summer of 1988, we didn't get, I personally did not get the chance to use the towers. Some of the people in my class did, but the wind picked up that day and they had to, terminate that part of the training for safety reasons. I never got to go off the towers. But yet, afterwards, it was a few years later, I've had dreams and memories of actually using that tower, one of those towers there. And there's a sense that I've carried with me even when I went through Airborne School, this feeling that I had gone through that training before. And I'm just saying that's an odd deja vu to have had, and I think it's important to point that out.
Thank you. Well, there were these halcyon experiments, and you've described a rejuvenation effect. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I will touch on, there was another course that I had to attend after Airborne School, and that's called the Ranger Indoctrination Program. That's a 3-week course that you have to go through to earn your way into one of the Ranger battalions. I completed that course after Airborne School, and then I was assigned to the 2nd Ranger Battalion in Fort Lewis, Washington. I got to 2nd Ranger Battalion. It was early fall of 1988, and became a member of the unit, and began all the training and all the things that go on with the unit. It was during that time, this was approaching the winter and getting into the winter of 1988, early 1989. I can't remember exactly what month it was. I was encouraged to attend a briefing about some medical experiments that were going to be going on. And so I went and attended the briefing. What the briefing was, it was an opportunity or an offer, if you would sign the paperwork to do it and give your consent, you could be part of these experiments with a drug called halcyon. The way they described their idea behind the experiments was that this drug would offer you the ability to go to sleep very rapidly, and basically knock you out, if you will. You would sleep approximately 3 hours, and then you would have you'd be more combat ready. In a way, they were trying to say this pharmaceutical would make you feel more rested and more combat effective after you used it. Knowing that volunteering for things is, one of the important ways that you get ahead, I volunteered to take part in those experiments. The way that worked was it was approximately a 2-week-long cycle. And what they would do is you would go out, and this all occurred on Fort Lewis, Washington. You would go out, do movements through the woods on Fort Lewis. You'd have an objective that you had to complete. And then at some point, during this period, they would give you this drug, and I guess they were monitoring how, the effects of that drug. The first time we did that, this involved a very long movement that, we started on one day. By the way, there was snow on the ground when all this was going on. This movement started on one day, and we walked, I don't know how many kilometers, in our movement. And again, we were moving towards an objective, so to speak. We got into the next morning, and this was again a very long movement over very rough terrain, and your body takes some punishment. You're exhausted, and you can feel it in your body that you've absorbed some punishment. When we got to our objective, it was an opening in the forest on Fort Lewis, Washington, and we came into the opening, and there were multiple people there with lots of equipment. Lots of vehicles were there with a lot of equipment on board, equipment setting on the ground. I couldn't tell you precisely what this equipment was. There were medical personnel there that were running testing on us, different types of eye-hand coordination testing, strength testing, going through these surveys. They were asking us lots of different questions. It's important to point out that there were people there in dress military uniforms. I personally was wearing a BDU uniform, a camouflage uniform that you wear in the field. Well, there were people there in this clearing that were wearing dress uniforms, and then these were high-ranking officer personnel, majors and lieutenant colonels and people like that from the Army. And I believe that there were some people there from the Air Force, if my memory serves me correctly. The way they did this was they had stations marked out on the ground where each individual soldier would lay down, and they gave us the drug. I remember trying to mark the moment where I felt the drug take effect and kind of put me to sleep. I didn't achieve that. It seemed like I went to sleep rather quickly. It was about 3 hours when I woke up. Myself and the other people that I was with, I'd say there were 15 to 20 of us in the group that I was working with at that time. I noticed immediately when I woke up, the first thing I noticed was there were members of my group that were having very adverse reactions to this experience. It seemed like massive headaches were the thing that was the issue. Medical personnel were dealing with these people because they're waking up to this was, it seemed very, very frightening for these guys. Some of them were vocally yelling out, from the pain that they were in. And so these medical people were trying to deal with them, and they eventually took them away. My attention was pulled away from that, and as I was setting up and feeling my own body and, feeling how this was, affecting me, I noticed that I felt completely rejuvenated. There wasn't any soreness in my body. I felt completely rejuvenated and almost new in a way after just 3 hours of sleep. And that was a common feeling among all the different guys that I was with during that time. The reason I bring this halcyon experiment up, by the way, I did sign non-disclosure agreements about that. And I feel so strongly about bringing this out that, that these are the sorts of things that go on in our military. And whether you sign these agreements or not, I think it's important that we start discussing these things, that these are things that occur. This cycle that I was on, as I mentioned earlier, it was approximately 2 weeks. Beyond that first iteration, I can't remember anything else that I did during that 2 weeks. It is all an absolute blur. After that first iteration, we would go back, take a break for about 24 hours, and then they would give us another mission, another exercise to do, where this drug would be introduced. And I honestly don't remember very much at all about the rest of that 2 week period. It just all is one big blur together. My memory just can't dig into that. But one experience I started having after these experiments were done, I started having memories and very lucid dreams about going somewhere else while I was under the influence of that drug, as if we had been taken elsewhere and used in some capacity. I remember being part of briefings and actually giving briefings during these memories. I can't say specifically where I think we were. I can't speak specifically to what any mission or exercise we were part of was. But over the years, and right after that, in the years following, memories have come through that make me feel that we went somewhere else, or we were involved in something else while I was unconscious from taking that drug.
Thank you. I notice you have a few documents there. Any of those documents pertain to the Rangers? And
yes, I do have my certificate from attending the Ranger Indoctrination Program, RIP. I do have to say and make it clear that when I attended Ranger School, that was in 1989, I was injured during Ranger School. You can probably see the scar on my knee here. I had an accident on an obstacle course, and it knocked me out of commission for some time. I never got the opportunity to go back to Ranger School, which I've always regretted. Typically in the Ranger units, they really want you to get through Ranger School as part of your development and as part of keeping a spot in those units. I was allowed to stay. They allowed me to stay and heal. They gave me other jobs to do. And I was always grateful for the fact that they let me stay and promoted me to sergeant while I was there.
So Michael, can you describe why you decided to apply to join the Seattle Police Department?
Yes. Michael, when I first was in the Army and during the time I was with the 2nd Ranger Battalion, I really had a desire to have a full military career, and I thought that my desire was to move on into the Special Forces units, or possibly, try out for some of the other units that are in the Army. Because of the injury and the fact that my wife at the time really wasn't very enthused about the Ranger existence and the military existence, I decided that I was going to get out of the Army at the end of my 4 years, which I did do. During that time, I became aware that I could test for the different police departments that were in the area out there in Washington State. And the idea of becoming a Seattle police officer was attractive to me. So I began taking tests for, the local police departments out there. I took 2 tests. I took one with Seattle, and I took one with the city of Mount Lake Terrace, Washington. I was lucky enough to get hired by Mount Lake Terrace right after getting out of the Army. I didn't have much of a separation there at all. And I went to the police academy and went to work for the city of Mount Lake Terrace. Now, while I was in the police academy, the academy at the time was run largely by Seattle police instructors. And I made friends with them, and they got to know me. And because I had successfully tested with Seattle, and I was on their list for interviews and, the possibility of being invited on board, they made sure to let me know that, they wanted me to come on board the Seattle Police Department, and that later an opportunity would present itself when the hiring freeze was lifted. I worked for Mount Lake Terrace for about 8 months, and Seattle finally called, and I decided to make that transition. I started with them in January of 1993. I had a great time there. I enjoyed police work very much. My career ultimately culminated with me being invited to try out for the SWAT team in Seattle. I was accepted, and I worked there for almost 4 years on the SWAT team. A big part of the duty that I fulfilled as a member of that team was, we worked with the Secret Service and other federal agencies on dignitary protection details. And this is a picture of myself with Al Gore. He was the vice president at the time. And this was one of the days that we were working with the Secret Service to provide protection for him. I have another picture here of myself with Hillary Clinton. This is when she was the First Lady in the 1990s. And this was a big part of the duties that I fulfilled as a member of the SWAT team there.
So Michael, as you were exploring coming out, you started to have chance encounters with intelligence personnel that convinces you that you're being encouraged in some way to come forward with your disclosures of the Space Marines.
Yes, I think it interesting for the viewers and listeners to know part of that story. When this awakening began for me, it really began towards the end of 2015. There was a compartment inside of me that fully remembered my recruitment into this program. I essentially leaned on that door my whole life. I put those memories away, and I leaned on that door and kept them at bay successfully for many, many years. But there came a moment when I couldn't do that anymore. The door flew open. I had no choice. These memories started presenting themselves fiercely, and I had to deal with that. When I began my awakening, when it was clear to me, after I had gone through all this paperwork that I had, that I'd never really looked at in detail, when I began analyzing my memories, and it also helped to some extent I was becoming aware that there were whistleblowers and people coming out describing very similar experiences to mine. I felt strongly that I had to go at least come to someone like yourself and other researchers and touch base with them to get a feel for whether you thought, this would be worthy of investigation. And I knew full well that it was. My first effort in reaching out and making contact with anyone in the ufology community was at Contact in the Desert. I believe that was May of this year, 2017. And before I go into that, I want to point out that when I began my awakening, when it was clear that, this was something I was going to have to deal with, a presence came in around me. And, I live in a place in middle Missouri where, if you're being followed or if there are people around you observing you, especially if you have the training that I have, you're going to notice those things. And that became a big part of my life for some time. For weeks, everywhere I went, I had vehicles following me, I had people around me, and I was also receiving communications. I'm not going to go into the manner in which those communications came, but there was a communication, and it was clear to me that there were people that knew that I was awakening. There was also some encouragement involved in those communications, that like this is something they wanted me to do. Well, when I came to Contact in the Desert, I went through the process of, I bought my ticket in advance, I went through the process of checking in and all those things, and I had only walked into the venue for a few moments, and people started coming up and speaking with me, and these were people that my instinct tells me had a background that could possibly be related to observing me, communicating with. I'm not going to say they were intelligence officers, but I'm going to say these were people that were very interested in me and what I was doing there, and again, in some ways encouraging me to move forward with what I was there to do. I can say that it took me a day or two after arriving at Contact in the Desert to even get up the courage to approach you, Michael, because, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure how I was going to go about this, and I was very nervous about it. I was still struggling with the idea that I might be giving away secrets about things that I shouldn't. I got comfortable with the idea, and I made my first contact with you and some other researchers there at that event. But yes, I do feel that some people were approaching me that were very interested in what I was preparing to do.
So what do you hope will happen as you reveal the existence of a US Marine Corps special group promoting disclosure of this Navy secret space program?
Okay. That ties into a lot of the memories that I have recovered over the last year and a half, 2 years. And a big chunk of those memories relates to absolutely knowing that I agreed and took an oath to come forward with this information. I think we discussed that in one of the earlier interviews. I know that is what I'm supposed to do. And there are, the obvious reason for that is disclosure. The secrecy of this thing, although I believe it was probably necessary at some point, considering all the different variables and the nature of the information, I believe the secrecy has gotten out of control. It's kind of turned into an organism with a life of its own, sustaining itself. The secrecy has made us less as a nation in some way. It's reducing us as a people because we're not getting the truth. The truth is so important in this matter because it deals with our true nature, who we really are, what technologies we really have available to us. And if we look around the world, we're still operating on fossil fuels. We have, electrical lines running through the air. So many things about our truth would make that unnecessary. That, and knowing what I went through during my awakening, and it wasn't pleasant. It wasn't pleasant at all going through the process of all of that opening up and flooding out of you. I can only assume, given the fact that when I was recruited into this program, there were multiple people with me going through the same experience. Michael, there have to be multiple people out there that could be going through the same experience. And I want to make sure they know they've got someone that cares and is listening and has compassion for them. That's a very important part of the message. Am I answering your question effectively?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, I have more to say about that. I think that's our last question of the day or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. What was that going to be?
So, what advice can you give for anyone listening who may have had their own secret space program experiences?
Okay. I will lead into answering that question by giving another statement, and that is, there is no one in this world that wants me to remember everything about this more than myself. I want every memory of any possible service that I have in this program, I want it all to come to me. It doesn't work that way. This is a process. I'm going through it. I'm doing everything I can to achieve that. What I'm trying to lay out for the viewers is to please have patience. Understand that someone going through this, it's difficult enough to come forward and share what I do remember, but no one wants those memories more than myself, and the reason I want them is because I want to share them with everyone. Now, that ties into the question you just asked me. To my brothers and sisters out there that have worn uniforms, and I'll start with the people that have possibly served in a secret space program. If you think this affects you, if you're having memories that you've carried possibly your whole life, or they're just now coming through, understand there are people out here that care. Understand that you may have a veritable treasure trove of documents in your possession that if you look deeply into them and read between the lines, you might find anomalies, as I have, that would be further indicators of such a program. I believe I had breadcrumbs left for me that helped me realize and wake up to my reality, and that has been a big help for me. I also would encourage any military veterans that, and this isn't for any, it's not exclusive to someone that might have served in a covert space program, to think for a minute about the conversations you had during your service. You might still be in. We all knew and we know that there are things that are very secret, that are well beyond anything we can probably imagine. I've had those conversations myself as a member of the military. I would appeal to those uniformed personnel and veterans from all the branches. Have an open mind. This also goes to my police officer brothers and sisters. Please have an open mind about this. This is real. It is so important that we get this information out. And nothing is more powerful than bringing these people together to a collective understanding, or at least accepting the potential that this can be true, because the assistance of veterans, the assistance of the police, other people, as objective observers to my testimony and the testimony of others that I hope will come forward, that's going to be very important to getting this information out. I have one more thing to say. If you believe that a program like this affects your life, you'll have, I understand you'll have to go through a process to get comfortable with whether to come forward or not. I would encourage you to do that. There are people out here that you can contact that will have this in common with you. We could help you to look at your paperwork and sort through the potential for this actually touching your life. This is very important, and it's time to bring these things forward and discuss them openly with the public at large in America and the world.
Well, Michael, I just want to point out, I think it's important for people to realize the sacrifices you've made and the courage it's taking you to come forward. I mean, there have been real sacrifices professionally in doing this, and I just want to honor that and honor your service to this country. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. It's been my honor to do these interviews, and I look forward to working more with you.